I am Diana Diaz. I am the CEO and creator of this academy, the Your Story to Tell Academy. And for the last 11 weeks, I've had the honor and privilege to work with these amazing women on crafting their beautiful stories. It's a group coaching program where for 11 weeks, we dive into principles of how to speak in public, but we use our stories and lived experiences as the vessel to communicate powerful messages. And so we talk about public speaking strategies and skills, but we use our stories. How and what better way to learn how to speak in public and speak powerfully than to use our own stories? We talked initially how to navigate through fear and mental blocks, which is essentially one of the biggest things that hold us back when we want to speak up, when we want to speak with confidence. And so in the beginning, half the program, it's a lot of written exercises and a lot of videos, but we go into these concepts really deep. That's one thing. When you work with me, we go deep right away. And that's a great way to start, because we sort of break down all the walls. We talk about your speaking style, because there's really no one size fits all when it comes to speaking. Naturally, you'll have people that are more bubbly and like just out there. So we want to play that up. There's also people that are more reserved and more serious. We don't want to change who they are. We just want to enhance it and learn ways that we can leverage that commanding presence in a way that also creates authenticity and connection. So it's about really getting to know the person in the beginning and learning to craft a style that really works for them. So that's what we did in these past 11 weeks. And it's very intuitive and it's very different from person to person. And I can tell you right now that the women that you are about to meet are incredibly different, but incredibly inspirational and amazing on so many different levels. We also talked about stage presence, and that really came into play when we were rehearsing the videos. It is, I kid you not, it is the most awkward thing when you start recording yourself on your cell phone, which is what we did. But we get over the awkwardness and we do it, and it's uncomfortable, but it's literally the way we get better. And so we definitely dived into theatrics, right? Voice fluctuation, the nuance. So when you want to know what is it that we do in this program, that's all it is. It's a very intuitive, very individualized public speaking coaching program. And stories are powerful. Stories, I do believe that stories heal. And so I've made it my mission to create an army of storytellers so we can heal the world. But without further ado, let's get started. I know we'll have the first speaker. You know who you are. I'd like for all of us to turn off our videos. Now, first up, we have a beautiful, brave woman, Elsie Navarro. She's a wife, mother, young breast cancer thriver, and advocate focused on creating awareness and offering support to those with similar experiences. Her story title today is Overcoming Fear During Breast Cancer. Elsie, you have the stage. Amiga, it's all yours.
Well, let me tell you, I started off my 2017 with so many aspirations. One of those aspirations was that I really wanted to get pregnant for the second time. And I was going to do anything that was in my power to make it happen. That was the goal for the year. See, my husband and I, we've been together since high school. So having this really big, huge family was always a big part of our dream. I was so sure I was going to make it happen. But unfortunately, God had a different plan in mind. You see, I was almost convinced that April that I had gotten pregnant. I had missed my menstrual cycle, and that only meant one thing, right? Well, I took a pregnancy test to confirm my thoughts, only to find out I wasn't pregnant. I was totally lost and confused. I had no idea for what had led up to those results. Well, the following month came, and it was May 4th of 2017, a day I will never forget. As I jumped into the shower that morning to get my day started, it was there. It was there that I discovered a decent sized lump just right underneath my right breast. It was about the size of a walnut, and I didn't feel any pain coming from the area. At that moment, I just remember freezing completely still as my mind went into a blank space for about a few minutes. I told myself, Elsie, there is no need to freak out. You are only 30 years old. Breast cancer, it is not even a thing at your age. I'll just keep an eye on it and I'll check back tomorrow. See, I was trying to convince myself of all the possibilities on why that lump would be there. I kept thinking, I must have just hurt myself. Maybe it's just a swollen area. I'll just keep an eye on it. I'll check back tomorrow. Well, the following day came, and I checked right underneath my right breast once more. I was hoping and wishing that it had just magically disappeared. Well, as figured, it was still there. I couldn't continue to deny its existence. I looked over at my 3-year-old son, and all these fears just came pouring in. That's when I picked up the phone. I called and I scheduled an appointment to be screened. I will never forget walking into that appointment that evening and sitting in the waiting room for what seemed like an eternity. I was questioning why they were taking so long just to give me my test results. Still, I tried to remain positive and I kept telling myself that it couldn't be bad news. Well, the nurse practitioner calls me in. As she sits me down, she starts flipping through her report. And in the most calmest voice, she says, "Sweetie, it's breast cancer. We just examined you last year and we didn't spot anything during exam. It seems like you may have caught it early. We'll refer you out to a breast surgeon for further exams." I remember I just kept staring at her. She continued to flip through the report. In that moment, I felt like my soul had just left my body. I felt so empty and numb. I was having a really hard time believing that this was really reality. I felt fine. Other than that lump right underneath my breast, I had no symptoms. I was healthy. I'll never forget walking out of that clinic, feeling like life had just stopped dead in its tracks. Everything that I was working towards that year had ended right there and then. Those first 2 weeks after diagnosis were just like straight out of hell. So many emotions consuming my every moment. I remember looking over at my son and just constantly crying. He was so small, and he often asked me, "Mommy, what's wrong?" I kept telling him, "Mijo, it's okay. Mommy just has a tummy ache," as I cleaned each tear off my face. See, there's not much you could tell a 3-year-old about breast cancer. It was then that I told myself, I must do what's in my power to stay alive. Crying all day wasn't going to get me anywhere. I had to face this head on and make the best out of my days. One of the hardest moments was telling my mother. See, we had just lost my grandmother to stomach cancer a year before. And under unforeseen circumstances, I had no choice but to call her. I broke down just trying to get my words out. My mom kept telling me, "Mija, ¿qué tienes? Dime." She panicked as I struggled to say the C word. It was one of the hardest moments of my life. See, nobody ever wants to deliver such horrible news to their parents. As we talked and cried over the phone, she tells me, "Mija, todo va a estar bien, no te preocupes." It was then that we discussed our family medical history. And she brought to my attention that my biological father's sister had passed away from breast cancer years ago. The onset of being diagnosed, it brought on so many discoveries of things that I just was not prepared to learn. I was often asked by medical professionals if I had a family history of breast cancer, and I always answered no. See, my biological father, he was absent for the most part of my life, so I had no information about his family medical history. Shortly after diagnosis, I took a genetic test that revealed my BRCA1 gene mutation. And you know what this meant? This meant that I was at high risk for developing both breast and ovarian cancer. More fear set in after the findings. I lived my life believing I was healthy. It was there that I learned about all my high potential risks for other cancers. I can recall feeling the devastation about how quickly your life can turn upside down. The idea of expanding my family was just quickly fading away. Just a month before, I had missed my menstrual cycle and I thought I was pregnant. Little did I know, my body was just giving me signs that something else was wrong. I went from the excitement of planning a pregnancy that year to grieving the loss of the idea that I once ever held about having a second child. This would bring on way too many risks that I just was not ready to take. This gene mutation discovery, it changed my plans for the future. But really, in that moment, I had another priority. I had to go on a mission to save my life. See, I nearly lost it towards the end of chemotherapy treatment. I must have had about 2 treatments left. I was expected to stay on schedule and finish right before my son's birthday and Christmas that December. I kept thinking it was just perfect timing. New year, fresh start. Well, my treatments were up at Stanford, and we take that 3 long-hour drive every single week. I start off my visits doing lab work. And on one occasion, I found out that my blood count was just way too low, and I'd have to hold off on treatment that week. The following week came, and we take that 3 long-hour drive, only to find out that my blood count was still way too low. At this point, I had gone about 3 straight consecutive weeks without treatment. I was beyond frustrated with my body. I kept thinking about the finish line, and it just kept getting further and further from my reach. I remember coming home that evening and going straight to my room to get some rest. I had been going through treatments for about 5 months at this point. Well, I couldn't take it anymore. I had buried so much and played it off in front of my loved ones. I didn't want them to worry about my mental health. But that night, I broke. I could no longer take it anymore. I cried so hard. The ugliest cry you've ever heard. I was honestly surprised no one heard me. In that moment, I questioned God, why? Why me? Why did I deserve this? Why would he pause my life right at that moment? Why? Right when I was beginning to build the most beautiful family of my dreams. I was upset with God and I cried to him because he was the only one that could help me. In that moment, I realized I wasn't as fine as I had made myself to believe. That evening, I had a conversation with God and I told him, listen, I can no longer live my life in fear that eats me up every single moment that I wake up. I am fighting with every fiber of my being to stay here for the ones I love so deeply. I truly have no more strength left in me. You're the only one that can change my destiny. From this point forward, I leave you all my worries and fears. I can no longer allow them to steal my inner peace. You see my life. It's truly in your hands, and I trust you fully with my life. You're the only one that knows what this life has planned out for me, the purpose behind this all. I will strive to live my life in peace, knowing and trusting you fully that you will help me get through this nightmare. There, right after that conversation with God, I felt restored. I felt this inner peace. I wouldn't allow these feelings to eat me up no longer. I trusted him. I knew that he had a plan set out for me, and after all this was over, The purpose of this journey would reveal itself with time. It was one of the lowest moments of my life. But looking back, I was thankful for that moment where I learned so much about myself. I no longer had to carry the weight of my hidden emotions. What I unleashed that evening helped me get closer to God. My faith had been tested. It was there that I surrendered my faith to Him, trusting His purpose for my life. See, this experience taught me I wasn't about to keep continuing to feel my fear. I was going to suffocate that sucker and not let it get in the way of disturbing my inner peace. You see, life is full of good and bad seasons, and sometimes in our darkest times, lessons are embedded in there. Even the sole act of forgiving was enough to keep me feeling lighter and gave me such a piece of wellness. See, we do more harm holding on to things that harm us both mentally and physically. And let me tell you, all the love I received during that season was really the best medicine. Looking back at this cancer journey of mine, I like to think that these tough moments were purposely placed in my path to build my character. You see, I am now a fearless character, a product of my own environment. I know that from here on out, life will continue to bring both joy and sorrow. You see, we all come into this life with an expiration date, and it's up to us to make each and every single day count. I acknowledge that death is the cycle of life, and we must accept that one day our time will come.
I'm so excited to keep the ball rolling. That was a beautiful intro to this event. Elsie, thank you. Next up, we have Eugenia Jordan. She is a top-level executive, originally from Russia, revolutionizing the telecom industry while embracing her lived experiences as an immigrant. Eugenia, please bless us with your story. The virtual stage is yours.
Hey everyone, if I told you I got out of prison not once, but twice, would you believe me? But it's true. And the first time it went like this. So it was an ordinary August night in 1991 in Moscow, Russia, in a small neighborhood where I was born. My mom, my sister, and I, we were sitting on a small couch. It's actually doubled as my mom's bed at night, and we were watching TV. I don't recall what we were watching, but I do recall that the sound from the TV was muffled by the sounds of scraping metal produced by military tanks. You see, back then in 1991, the Communist Party was trying to remove Gorbachev, who was the country's leader at the time, from his power. They didn't want his progressive changes to take place. So they did what they do best. They brought military into the city. At 21, naive and somewhat sheltered, I didn't understand the full gravity of what was going on. I just saw a worry on my mom's face. And I knew that things were getting bad for all of us. But how bad? Bad enough that my mother said something so profound that night that her words stuck with me forever. With somewhere in her voice, she cried, "You two have to leave this country. You cannot end up like me." You see, she got to be the person she was because she was a single mom to two daughters in Russia. She worked extremely hard. She got up at 5 a.m. in the dark, got ready for work, got on a bus, rode an hour to work. We had enough money for basic clothing needs and food. She worked as a secretary. But she never gave up hope. And she never allowed us to give up hope. That became apparent that night when she said those words. You deserve better. She was right. I did deserve better. So in the next 3 years, I would finish a college in Russia, and then I would find a program in Canada that took foreign educated women that wanted to start a new life. So my sister and I left Russia with just 2 suitcases each, filled with some pots, pens, clothes, books, and $5,000 to our name. We flew through Rome, and we stayed right downtown Rome in a tiny little boutique hotel waiting for our morning flight to our new home, Toronto. And as I walked the wintry streets of Rome, I found myself next to the Trevi Fountain, the famous Trevi Fountain. And as I breathed in the cold, fresh winter air, I knew right there and then I broke out of my first prison. So Canada became home. I met some wonderful, great friends. I felt so free. And then I met him. You see, this was the summer of 2000. I just graduated from college, my second college, now in Canada with a computer undergrad, and I got a great new job in the computer industry. But you know what? Despite all those great things going on in my life, I felt that something was missing. I was turning 30 that year, so I felt that my biological clock was ticking. So one night, I was on the computer looking at some personals, and I found him, sweet and charming. He lived in a small town in the US. Were there red flags? My friends in Canada they did see some red flags. They saw how controlling he was and how fast he tried to cut me away from them. But what about me? Did I see any red flags? I was so infatuated with the happily ever after. I ignored every single red flag. So, after a few visits back and forth, I moved in the US and we got married, all in the matter of 6 months. And then this is all started. Control, belittling, control of my every single step. I was stuck in a tiny little town. The money I made from the job as a receptionist went to cover his gambling debts. I didn't even have enough money to buy shoes. You know what I used to do? I used to take the black Sharpies and I used to cover the worn out spots with those black Sharpies. Why did I stay? You wonder, why did I stay? You know, this marriage that's been gone 15 years is my broken place. I still feel the shame that I allowed myself to lose my freedom. I cannot pretend. I really cannot pretend that it did not change me. It did change me. but not in ways that anyone can see. It actually made me stronger. It made me who I am today, a C-level female executive that now, after all that, is not afraid to stand up for what's right. Because you know what? Though this marriage is my broken place, I'm not broken. I am not broken. So now you wonder, what was the last straw? What was that last straw that told me, get out? So it was the summer of 2006. I organized a party for the company I worked at as a receptionist. And it was on George's Island in the Boston Harbor. Everyone was having a great time. Everyone was having a greatest time, except for him. My ex-husband was standing by the big tree. He was holding onto a stroller with our toddler son in it. And as I came over to check on them, this is when it all started. You fucking dick! Go! I'm done with this! All I kept asking to keep his voice down. And then I lifted my head and I saw a coworker nearby. He was looking at me with such sadness in his eyes. I couldn't take it anymore. In my head, I heard those words, my mom's words from the summer of 1991. You deserve better. Because of those words, I would start looking for my own place the same very night. Because of those words, I would file for divorce in 2007. Because of those words, my little son and I, we would move out with 2 suitcases each, filled with some pots, pans, books, clothes, and $5,000 to our own name. Because of those words, I was finally free. I was free to make my own career choices. I was free to make new friends. I was free to travel. And you know what? Later that year, I actually took a solo trip to Paris. And as I walked the midnight streets of Paris, I found myself next to the Museum of Modern Art. It's actually a tall glass building. And as I breathed in the fresh, cold air, I knew right there and then, I broke out of my second prison. And right there and then, I made a promise that I would never, ever allow this to happen to myself or anyone else I know. All because of those words my mother said that August night, you deserve better. Never in my wildest dreams, me, an immigrant woman and a single mother, I could imagine that I would become who I am today, changing the telecom industry, managing large teams, strategizing. All because of those words. Because of those words, I would dream the biggest dreams. And because of those words, I'm standing in front of you right now, letting you know that you, your family, your friends, your kids, we all deserve better. So fight for your better. Help others to get their better. Because you know what? the circumstances of our lives, no matter how bad or sad they are, they don't define us. We define ourselves. And sometimes we cannot pick the places where we're born or circumstances of our lives. But if we break out from our prisons, we all can build a life that we deserve. Thank you.
So next up, we have Norma Fernandez. Norma, she is the CEO of Everyone On, a national nonprofit dedicated to creating social and economic opportunity for people by connecting them to the internet and digital skills training. You do so much, Norma, and we're so excited for you to share your very uplifting story with us. So please bless us with your story, Norma. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Diana. Well, I'm excited to share this story because I remember these things very vividly. And in particular, this story that I'm going to start off with. It was a Saturday afternoon in Los Angeles. My brother and I were playing baseball and not in a park not too far away from our home. So we were lucky that we had a park to play in. And the 3 baseball fields that were at the park were full of young kids ready to play some games. I was only 10 years old and I was headed for the pitcher's mound. So what's unique about this is that I was the only girl in an all-boys team back when all-girls teams were not common, and let alone a little girl playing in an all-boy team. But there I was with my hair pulled up high in a ponytail, wearing my uniform, which were white pants and a navy blue jersey with bright orange letters spelling out the Astros. That was my team name. I would have preferred the Dodgers, of course. But excitement was running through my body. I couldn't believe that my coach had just asked me to pitch. Now, this was really exciting for me because normally I played outfield. So being asked to pitch was a big deal, and to pitch the first pitch of the game. I had never pitched before, but the coach's encouragement was, I feel, all I really needed to go for it. And I also thought to myself, even at 10 years old, why not try? I have nothing to lose. So there I go. I make my way up to the pitcher's mound for my first pitch, telling myself, I can do this. When I saw the player on home base ready to go, and the bleachers full of families, moms and dads, friends, cousins, really there to watch us play, all of a sudden, of course, the butterflies, I could feel them in my stomach. But I was ready to go with my first pitch when all of a sudden, I heard some taunting comments coming from the audience, from the crowd that had gathered. Taunting. And when I looked up, I noticed they were coming from the dads and the other men from the opposing boys team who had gathered at the fence to watch. I heard comments like, look at the little girl, she's going to pitch, followed by laughs. Can she do it? More laughs. I could still hear their taunting, and if I really think about it, it was more like bullying. And perhaps I can only imagine what they thought. Maybe that I didn't belong there. One thing was clear. They thought I couldn't possibly pitch because I was a girl. And of course, for a moment, I felt discouraged and confused. Why were adults laughing at me? Why weren't others saying anything? But then I remembered my coach put me there. He believed I could do this. And of course, a sudden and strong sense of confidence and eagerness overcame my body. I can do this. I'm going to show them. I brought my glove and my ball up to my face, and I took a deep breath. I swung my arm with all my might as a 10-year-old, and I went for the throw. A few seconds later, I heard the familiar sound of a fastball hitting the catcher's mitt. Strike. The crowd gasped in disbelief because just a few seconds earlier, they were probably thinking I couldn't throw a fastball or a strike. And so the feeling of utter satisfaction filled my 4-foot body. I was proud and I was empowered. I didn't know it then, but that moment would mark me forever. The taunting and frankly, the bullying, although it was aimed to demoralize me, did the exact opposite. It fueled me. My sense of confidence and can-do attitude were born that day. Till this day, when someone questions my abilities or tells me something is not possible, and when I'm afraid of trying something new or difficult, like running a national nonprofit and trying a new sport like tennis, I think of my 10-year-old self standing on the pitcher's mound, defying people's perception of what girls and women can do and going for it. Now, fast forward a few years, I found myself on the campus of UCLA on an August morning in 2002. I was sitting there at the bench waiting for classes to start. I was there to start my 3rd year as a college student. It was very early, so there weren't many students around. It was 8 a.m. Who takes classes at 8 a.m. in college? Well, I did. And I was feeling excited and alive and eager, just ready to start. And I was thinking about all the work that went into getting me there. I thought about my journey. Just a few months ago, I had graduated from Santa Monica College, and UCLA was my dream school. And I worked really hard to get there. Early mornings, I take public transportation from East LA to Santa Monica. And if you're from Los Angeles, you know that's a big trek. I had a full-time schedule of classes. I was working part-time, and I was studying really hard because I really wanted to transfer to UCLA. And I made it there. So of course, as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, wow, I'm here, all the work paid. And then I had other thoughts. How did this happen? Did they make a mistake accepting me? Did I even belong here? Because it was that surreal to me. I thought of my parents and their journey to come to the US for a better life. They were both born in Mexico, and when they were in their 20s, they crossed the border, landed in Los Angeles, and met here in their adopted country and built a family and a life together. And while they never fully understood what was needed to go to college, let alone or school or college, I was actually the first one in my family to do so. They taught us, me and my siblings, the importance of hard work. Échale ganas en todo lo que hagas. I could still hear my dad saying those words, and he still says them. This message truly has carried me through my life, from high school, community college, to UCLA, and even now. And I also thought about all the people that helped me get to this point in my life, who supported me with advice and guidance. And one person stands out. Her name is Dora Cervantes. When I was 17 years old, I started my first job as a secretary at a local nonprofit called New Economics for Women. And Dora was a project manager. She was tall because of her high heels. She always wore a skirt or pantsuit, a nice shirt, hair up in a ponytail, nude or pink lips. She looked professional. She looked in control, and she was confident, yet she always wore a smile and never failed to greet me or others, which was really touching. And what was cool is I got to see her day in and day out, talk to construction contractors, architects, engineers, and others to get her projects done. She really was a powerhouse. And I had never been in this kind of environment, surrounding by surrounded by community development professionals who happen to be Latinas building affordable housing for families. That was exciting to me. I had never been exposed to that. And here I was in this environment surrounded by these powerful Latina professionals making an impact in our community. And I remember thinking, I want to do what Dora's doing. Where do I start? So one day I built up the confidence to approach her. I was a little nervous, but I thought, why not try? What do I have to lose? And I asked her, Dora, how can I prepare myself to do what you're doing? And what are you doing? I wanted to learn a little bit more. She took me under her wing. And it was through her actions and her words, which I got to observe day in and day out, that Dora modeled how to be a listener, a reliable team member, and a problem solver. She always pushed me to learn more, to grow, and to always give back. Now, when I was applying to UCLA, I happened to be working with Dora, and I struggled with my personal statement. Even though I had a story to tell about my life and how it had prepared me to be a successful student at UCLA, I didn't know how to articulate it, and I didn't believe it was enough. I thought to myself, does my story matter? Am I really qualified as a candidate for UCLA? Dora reassured me. Yes, your story matters, and yes, you are more than qualified. She was instrumental in me believing this and showed me how to craft an essay that was raw, that was compelling, and that, guess what, got me into UCLA, or at least helped get me into UCLA. So with her help, I'm so happy to share that I was admitted to UCLA, where I thrived while I was there. I graduated with my bachelor's in sociology, and I decided to stay for another 2 years because I loved UCLA. And remember, I wanted to do what Dora was doing. So I followed her footsteps and I did my master's in urban planning. My career in community development, which has included building affordable housing, revitalizing neighborhoods, helping small businesses, and now increasing access to technology, really stems from my encounter with Dora and those other people that I was exposed through my early career journey. But it was also fueled by my willingness to ask her questions and others' questions, and her openness to also guide me. Today, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Everyone On, which is a national organization that focuses on creating social and economic opportunity by connecting people, especially under-resourced communities, to affordable internet service, computers, and digital skills training. We want to make sure people have not only the tools at home, like the internet and computers, but also the skill set and the confidence to harness the power of the internet. I'm in this position also because of my former boss, who saw potential in me and mentored me to take over the organization. And interestingly enough, just a few months into this new and exciting role at the end of 2019, the pandemic struck. I was a new CEO of a national organization working on one of the most pressing issues of our time, the digital divide. And there were many moments of feeling overwhelmed, doubt, fear, and honestly just stuck. I had thoughts of, can I manage all this? How will I manage this? But I've also thought, why not try? I've come to learn that these thoughts and feelings are normal. They come and go, but they don't define me. To overcome them, I think about myself again on that pitcher's mound, little but brave, that went up to pitch, defying people's perceptions. I ignore the noise and I charge ahead. I continue to use this experience as fuel, and I continue to support other women in their journeys, just as Dora, my parents, and others have done for me.
So next up, we have Erica Toribio. She's a social worker and educator building community and leadership with youth and families with a focus on the importance of social emotional learning. And her story title is Finding Purpose as a Young Mexican Immigrant. Please, Erica, bless us with your story. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Diana. That was such a warm welcome. So let's begin. Not too long ago, a friend of mine asked me over dinner about my very first job. As I sat there, I reflected and I realized I've had about 10 or more different jobs since the age of 6. Yes, you did hear right, since the age of 6. This was obviously before child labor laws were actually enforced. So back in 1988, 1990, when my parents first migrated to the United States, for the very first time, the only job opportunities that were available to undocumented individuals who didn't speak the language and who didn't know the country was working in the fields. So my parents have worked most of their lives in the fields. In fact, my father still works in the fields picking various fruits to this day. It's actually cherry season, so he's out there. And I remember one day my parents decided to take me to work with them to pick olives. Now, I don't know if it was because they couldn't find a babysitter or if it was to help them out, or maybe it was just a little bit of both. And I remember they would pick an olive tree together and they would each carry a ladder and they would carry a bucket that they would tie in their chest area. And they would wear white gloves to protect their hands. So they would go up the ladder, pull the olives off the branches, fill the bucket, go down the ladder, and dump it into another bigger bucket. The goal was to fill as many buckets as possible because more buckets equals more money. Obviously, I was too young to go up the ladder and carry the bucket in my chest area at age 6, but I did have a very important job. My job was to pick all the olives that would fall down to the ground and fill my own buckets. At that time, it was kind of like a game for me. It was almost fun. Although I knew that I didn't want to pick olives, it just felt great to help my parents out. I don't remember honestly how long it took me, but not only did I complete it or filled one bucket, but I filled 2 buckets by the time it was lunchtime. And I remember I was standing proud and just happy. And as I was standing there, el mayordomo, which is also known as the supervisor, passes by and he sees me. And he looks at me and with a very serious tone, he's asked me, "How old are you, young lady?" And I said 6 with a very, very timid voice because I was afraid I would actually get in trouble. He then tells me, "Did you fill all these buckets all by yourself?" Yes, I did. He says, "You know what? Are your parents going to pay you?" I didn't answer. So he says, "You know what?" As he pulls his wallet, he says, "Here's $2 for each bucket that you filled." So then he handed me $4 cash right then and there. That was such an awesome feeling. That was such a proud moment and a happy moment. And I was there collecting my money. As I collected it, I saw a taco truck. So I go to the taco truck. I ordered myself 3 tacos, a bag of chips, a soda can. And in that moment, I felt such a baller. I was enjoying life. I was living life to the fullest as I was eating my tacos under an olive tree, which, by the way, were delicious. And things do taste much better when you earn them with your hard work. Years continue, and from time to time, I would help my parents out to pick olives. I would also help my parents sell water bottles, and I would help them sell soda cans to other field workers as my parents worked in the fields. Very quickly, they began to emphasize the importance of education and going to school. So we would only help out my parents during the summertime. So while everyone would enjoy their summer times, my family would travel to Washington State to pick cherries and apples. And that was our norm. Although we would wake up from early mornings to late afternoons, and we would live at campsites because we didn't have housing, I have some of the best memories growing up. My parents, especially my mom, did such an amazing job at making our experiences happy and memorable. And the stories I can actually tell you, Like that one time I lost my little sister in the fields because we were picking cherries and I got distracted and I lost her. Or the time my other sister hurt herself because we snuck out of the campsite without permission. Or the times we got stuck in portable parties in the field works, that's a different story. Or the times that, or the endless times that we spent at our favorite park playing and swimming, or the best meals we had as a family, eating under the olive tree or the cherry tree as a family. And honestly, frankly, too many stories to tell. And those were my summers growing up. Thinking of my youth in other aspects, I would say I was the girl that never quite fit in. I didn't really fit in middle school. I didn't really fit in high school, and college was not the exception. After high school, I went on to Fresno State, a 4-year university. And my first semester was rough, to say the least. And I remember I was falling behind school. I was having a hard time making friends. I struggled financially, and I terribly missed home. By midterm of my first semester, I had received 3 D's, 1 F, and honestly, I just felt defeated. I felt like I wasn't comprehending the material or the content. I didn't know what the instructors were talking about, and there was just so much homework. And to top it off, I was flunking the remedial classes, okay? So one day after I failed another exam, I decided that I was quitting college, that it wasn't for me, and that I would just go home and everything would be fine. So on that Friday, I packed my books, I packed my extra clothing, and when my parents picked me up, like they would pick me up every Friday, my mother noticed the extra luggage, but she didn't say anything. Once we arrived to Woodlake, which is the small town that I grew up with, I got the courage to tell my mom that I was quitting school and that college was not for me. My mother just stood there silently and stared at me. And for those that know my mom, she has this stare, a stare that can kill. And after a few moments, she asked, ¿Qué? ¿Por qué? ¿Tan rápido te diste por vencida? You gave up so fast already? Why? Without necessarily allowing me to answer. Then she continues to tell me, tu padre y yo no nos hemos partido el lomo para que la niña diga, ya no puedo. Which nicely translates to, we didn't work our asses off just so you can decide not to go to college. I just stood there like a niña regañada because I would not dare talk back to my mom. So then she proceeds to ask me, what's next? What's your plan? Again, I stayed there silently. I couldn't answer, but perhaps because I was just too embarrassed to admit to my mother that I didn't have a plan. She then tells me her famous words that she would tell my sisters and I, if you are going to live under my roof, then you're going to have to work, porque yo no mantengo flojas ni huevonas. And since you don't have a college degree, I doubt anybody's going to hire you. So what's your plan? ¿Cuál es tu plan? I just stood there and I thought, oh shit, I really didn't think this through. She then told me, tomorrow you're coming with us a la uva. Mañana vienes a la uva con nosotros. I told her that she didn't understand my struggle in school. I told her that I felt dumb. I told her that I was not as smart as my other classmates, that I didn't speak English well, that I hadn't made new friends, that I didn't have a car, I was struggling financially, and I felt so lonely. Even though I had roommates, I felt so lonely. This was the first time I was actually away from home. She looked at me and told me, life is hard. College is the least of your struggles. I stood there and quietly said, okay. The next day, I remember we woke up at 3:45 in the morning. And Grape season is in the hottest temperatures of the summer, usually 99 degrees plus. I helped my mom make our breakfast burritos or lunch, and we made rice and beans burritos. And we got in the car. We drove about an hour to Delano, California. And we got off the car, and I just stood there. And I looked at los surcos de uva, the grape groups, and they just seemed so long, never quite ending. The way my parents picked this type of grapes is called la tabla de uva. And in order to pick the grapes, you first are handed brown paper. So it's like large pieces of like almost like Post-it notes, but like extra bigger, and they're brown, and you have to be careful because they are painful. So then you select your surco, your grape group, and next to it, there is sand that is, there is the ground that is compacted in sand. You then have to put the sheets of paper on the ground, and then you almost have to kneel and squat under the grapevines, carrying a bucket that's about this wide and about a feet high, and then you're giving a grape hook that is actually made of a steel blade. So then you go in there and start picking. And the goal is to try to complete your surco by the end of the day, or try to fill those sheets with grapes as many as possible. So my mom handed me the brown paper, she handed me the cutting knife, and she told me, este es tu surco. This is your grape group. And off I went. By 10 a.m., I was done. I was exhausted, I was hot, and I sat down next to the shade under the grapevines to get a drink of water. My mother, of course, saw me, and she quickly came to me, and with the firm voice, she instructed, aquí no se descansa. There's no breaks here, mija. Get up y chingale. I got up with what felt like every ounce of strength that my body can gather, and I kept on picking, cutting the grapes, tossing them into my bucket, and then tossing them to the brown paper. By now, I had cut my hands with the brown paper. To top it off, I got stung by bees. I was so exhausted. I was so tired. And I was so frustrated, and I was so angry. My face was covered in dirt, where you can only see my teeth and my eyes. My mother saw me, of course. She comes to me, and I looked at her. As tears were rolling down my eyes, I looked at her and I told her, ya no más, ma. Ya no más. Ya no más. She then tells me, with a bit of sadness in her voice, you see these never-ending fields, mija? This will be your life if you don't continue your schooling. One day, you will be done with school, and you'll have far better opportunities than staying in the fields. And I cried, and I hugged her, a hug that lasted like an eternity. And through that hug, I was telling her, thank you. I was telling her, I am sorry. I was telling her, I will do better for you, ma. Of course, being my mother, she handed me the blade and told me, the day is not over. Así es que a seguirle chingando. And never again the thought of quitting school crossed my mind. I definitely struggled. I had various jobs to pay for school. I had to retake 2 classes because I did fail them, but I knew I couldn't quit. I had to make my parents proud. Their sacrifice had to be worth something. But most importantly, I had to prove myself that I can do it. And I did. I returned back to school grateful, definitely motivated, and with the goal in mind, and that was to graduate Fresno State. Interestingly enough, a couple of weeks later, I met a group of wonderful friends who we are still friends to this day that became a pivotal part of my support system. I am pleased to report that I graduated Fresno State with a bachelor's degree. I went on to receive the master's degree in social work. Today, I am blessed. I am blessed to have a thriving career. I have a passion for what I do. I do recognize that I had a choice. We all do. Thankfully, I made the right one. Gracias, mami.
So let's keep it going. We have our final speaker of the night. Her name is Alma Cárdenas. She's a countercultural and faith-rooted writer, published author, and mentor with over 10 years experience in youth leadership, who values truth, justice, and the prophetic voice of our youth and women of color. And her story title is Breaking Patterns: Why I Left Institutionalized Church. Alma, please finish off this evening with your beautiful story.
Gracias. Gracias. Catching my breath after Erica's story. What a beautiful story. One of the moments I never forget in my life is the dark night when I almost died drunk. It was a Saturday night, and it must have been about 10 p.m. when the streets of Los Angeles were just beginning to light up for the night. And that night, I was at a party with friends in somewhere in Hollywood, California. My relationship with my best friend then was not romantic in nature, but she had a way to manipulate and control. By then, I was close to turning 21, and the routine of having to submit to her ideas and plans for at least 2 years was getting old. Control and manipulation was something that I wanted to leave behind. That night, we got into a fight because I wanted to leave, but she wanted to stay. And I would normally abide by her plans. But this time, I was not feeling the people or the energy in the room. Something felt really off. So I left the hall that night really drunk. I remember there was wine, vodka, and whiskey at the table, and I must have drank one or all. I decided for myself, and I left that party to get into my car to drive back home. Because yes, for some reason, I thought it would be a brilliant idea to get in my car and drive home drunk. But of course, I was so drunk that I didn't know where I was going. I could not get myself to control the wheel. And for a moment there, I knew this was it. I'm going to die. And all I could think about was my siblings and my parents, especially my mom. And suddenly I saw lights of cars headed my way, and I realized that I was driving in the lanes of opposing traffic, and they were coming my way. And as much as I tried to swerve to the right, I could not get myself to move to the right to avoid the oncoming traffic. I was for sure that I would die that night. And the only thing that I could think to do was the very thing that I was taught growing up, which was pray to God. So I managed to pray out to God, and I said something like, God, if you are there, if you are real, would you come help? Then something that I could only describe as divine and God intervention took place. I remember feeling my car be lifted as if my 94 Toyota Corolla that my best friend was so ashamed of was of a Power Wheel toy car weight be lifted by God-sent angels to be redirected. As if the Psalm 34:7 was coming to life, and the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. As soon as I turned, I was somehow back in the parking lot of that hall, wondering what the fuck had just happened and how I was still alive. I walked back in, sat in the corner for hours, sobering up, as the blur of the dark room, DJ lights, and the people drinking and dancing in the background were still up and alive. I sat numb and unfazed by any movement or the friends that had come to check how I was doing without knowing that I had left, or much less knowing what had just taken place. As I drove home that night, I remember thanking God. And it hit me right there and then that that was not the legacy that I wanted to leave behind. Since I was in diapers, I grew up in a Latina Protestant Pentecostal church. And while many of us kids became like siblings and long life friends, the structures and systems in place that were perpetuated by the church were anything but a gospel of good news. They preached about two ways: the life-giving way that led by going in the way of the church, and the hell-leading way that was the one that you went by following the world. But what if the life-giving way they preach was actually killing? That is a question I often ask myself over and over again. The culture perpetuated by them was one of policing my clothes, policing my friends, policing my family, policing our thoughts. Free will and choice were only welcome for as long as they fit their ideas, patterns, and molds. The pastors and leaders were put on these high pedestals, and our parents trusted them enough to have a say in our upbringing. But the culture of shame and always pointing out what was wrong instead of what was beautiful and right in us just truly drained me out. The moment that hit the fan for me was the moment when I realized, to the degree of shallowness and bowing down to silence in the name of picture perfect, rather than to the truth and justice, which is the essence of the Jesus whom they preached. When I was close to turning 18, I was called into a church leader's office because I had been caught being truant. And as a form of intervention, my mom was just trying to help me out. She sent me to this leader's office. So I showed up to this leader's office, and it was just him and I. And he looks at me and he says, "What is happening to you? Your mom tells me it has not been good." At that moment, I stayed quiet. And then I proceeded with saying the following. I should start by saying that I was sexually molested at your church 10 years ago by one of the kids' teachers while the kids were out playing. Serene and unworried, this leader did not respond. I continued. The teacher asked me to stay back, told me to never say what was about to happen, and then he sat me on his lap. Because that's what we had been taught, I did not respond or question our elders or teachers, much less in the context of the church. I wanted to throw up after this moment, but I held it down. I thought I would sense some relief of finally speaking this out, but his silencing only served to tense every inch of my body as if I was reliving the moment. No one to come save me. No Psalm 34 taking place then or now. Because this leader's response to what I had just shared was nothing. Not even "Are you okay?" Did he not hear what I said? Now I wonder if his response was only a numbing response to something which that leader had heard and probably taken place before. I left that day knowing that church was absolute bullshit, because how can these leaders intend to hold us accountable for our mistakes without being willing to be held accountable on their own? I vowed to leave and never return. Between that moment and the drunk night, so many unhealthy choices took place. But I guess what I had been longing all along was the life-giving way, some affirmation. After the drunk night, it took me a few months to step into church. And while I knew church was imperfect, I knew God was real. I had understood grace for myself that night. Even as a young adult, when I stepped foot back in church, choice was not welcome, and leaders expected all of their sheep to be vulnerable, while their picture-perfect lives are lies. But this time, I broke a pattern. In search of the divine God who thought that I was worth enough to save that drunk night from death, I attended seminary school, a place where people, mostly men, were sent to become pastors, be ordained, or become the parachurch leaders. I wanted a place where I could ask all the Bible, God, and life questions that church was not willing to engage with or listen to. And without the approval of many, I made my way. By that time, I was working alongside the youth leadership team. And my hope was that as a leader working alongside the youth, was that I could lead from a place that affirmed the image of God in the youth and in one another, with transparency and an openness to be questioned and held accountable, to work in ways that stayed away from a one-man leadership to a shared leadership. My goal was not to repeat the same control and manipulation, but instead make space for all of us to lead and grow. On this journey, I made many mistakes. I was on my way to repeating the same exact patterns as if our youth were cows stamped by us, an owner. But seminary school is the vehicle that God used to interrupt and unlearn toxic, to relearn theological foundations, to help me live my life and leadership out differently. Seminary school was a 7 years long healing experience that I did not know I needed. There, many undealt with situations and realities that had numbed me to paralyzation and silence to be able to survive and stay afloat came to the surface. But the seminary community and the story sharing in the groups were those men and women who brought me back to Jesus as we went through the readings, assignments, and retreats to be able to walk on my own again. The story of Martha and Mary in the book of Luke are one of the many stories where I found truths that would set me free and open up the Espíritu Santa in me without hindrance or needing any human permission. In the story, Martha was doing the traditional hosting duties as they welcomed Jesus into their home. But Mary, on the other hand, was getting ready to do the unthinkable. She dared to sit at the feet of Jesus, a rabbi, making her way into an academic space because that was a posture that a student held at the feet of a teacher or a rabbi. It was unthinkable because that academic space in those times of Jesus was only meant for men. And if you were ever caught as a woman in those spaces, you would be expelled from community or probably even dead. But she did it anyway. And Jesus did not shame her. In fact, Jesus affirmed her by responding to Martha's complaining that Mary was not submitting to that traditional role, that Mary had chosen a better part. He did not belittle the role of Martha either, but he affirmed Mary's choice for choosing where she would have never been called had she not on her own. In that moment, I was affirmed in my own choice of attending seminary, even when it was frowned upon, or in other instances, a belittled accomplishment. That was the day I welcomed my voice back home, to embark on a relationship that I had denied my body, spirit, and soul, as I reclaimed my power of exercising my own choice without a fear of retaliation. And every time I heard or sang the lyrics of a congregational song by Miel San Marcos, no hay lugar más grande, más alto que estar a tus pies, I would cry because I could hear God saying, Alma, in choosing to live in a posture of learning at my feet, you have chosen a better part. A shift occurred in 2019. My family and I, by then, I was married to Sergio, and we had 2 girls. Sergio, who was always a pastor by heart and call, but never actually called that because threat. Finally took the step to exit our faith space entirely, which we had called community and home for years. The same feelings of being numb and driving my dreams to sure death while feeling alone of that drunk night arose again. So the need to exit entirely was an urge that grew internally. I needed a space to rest, reflect, and marinate on my experiences once again. During this time, in the stillness is where I found clarity. And it was there that God took me to the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, where Habakkuk is crying to God about the injustice and violence that he and his community are experiencing. And in response, God tells Habakkuk, write the vision. There, God reminded me of the cry in my heart of seeing so much brilliance brilliance hindered by toxic environments and structures, my longing to see youth and women free to speak and step into their gifts and dreams without having to wait until someone comes to open a door that, as I have learned, may never come. And it was then when I felt God telling me, now write the vision. How would you see this answered prayer come to life? And as I sat with that, while I knew I could not do everything, I understood that I could own a part. And for me, that meant to write my story and share the groanings of my heart. And here I am, holding my first self-published book called Groanings from the Desert. Praise be to God. Today, I continue to write, learn, and reimagine faith community spaces that will help youth and women come together to know God, be affirmed, but also to share in the spirit of Habakkuk, to illuminate with our laments, stories, and testimonials, and see our visions as answered prayers come to life for the shalom, for the peace, for the well-being of our communities. Alma, I am proud of you.
Thank you all. I am going to read a poem to close off the night. It's called My Liberation. It was published in the Latinx Poetry Project by Alegria Publishing. It's called My Liberation. And I think, honestly, it just goes very well with just what we're doing tonight, which is courage, right? And freedom and liberation. So it's called My Liberation. I walk on broken roads, tipping and towing around rubble and rocks. I breathe in toxins precipitated by forces of corruption, forces of all too familiar paradoxes. The scene is fury from unresolved tension, and I suffocate. For long before my time, there was a preordained creed that diminished my essence to a vessel, a basin to dilute the perversion of the male gaze, and I shrink. With every vile stare, I shiver with disgust and I shrink. Generations of mandatory performances have worn on me, and I weep. Praise only for this, my self-sacrifice at the expense of my sanity, and I weep. God knows I have pain through the sprouting of my seeds, and my seeds now echo my flesh enigma no more. A permutation of dignified depths is imperative to the rebirth of my soul. Only now I stand unbolted with the unearthing truth that my cry is my salvation, and only I can set myself free. Yeah. Thank you all for the beautiful women that I had the honor and privilege to work with. I am so proud of you. Thank you for allowing me to enter this space with you. I only hope that we can continue to work together now that we know each other, now that we've shared this bond. And I really do hope that this is the beginning of a lot of things for all of you. Let this not be the last time you share your story. Let this be the beginning of always sharing your story at every opportunity you can.